Indiana State Representative Ryan Hatfield discusses what's going on in the Indiana General Assembly. That's coming up next on WNIN Lawmakers. I'm John Gibson, and this is WNIN Lawmakers. We're joined this week by Indiana State Representative Ryan Hatfield, whose district includes much of Evansville. Before we talk with Representative Hatfield, though, let's get a quick update from Brandon Smith in Indianapolis.
The Senate approved a bill to spend $291 million in excess budget surplus dollars, sending it to the governor. Republicans opted to use that money on cash payments for higher education building projects rather than bonding them. Democrats sharply criticized the bill, arguing the money should be spent on teacher pay. A House committee unanimously passed a bill to ban drivers from using cell phones unless hands-free. That's a priority of Governor Eric Holcomb's that leaders of both chambers say has a good chance to pass. And a measure to stop utility companies from retiring old coal-fired power plants cleared a House committee along party lines. Only coal lobbyists testified in support. Most opposed it, including environmentalists, the utilities, and the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
Representative Hatfield, thank you for joining us today. We certainly appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
All right. Well, we heard Brandon mention this one, a bill that's been talked about quite a bit. It's the first bill actually headed to the governor's desk this session. It's to spend $291 million, surplus dollars that is, on higher education building projects. As I understand it, you voted against it. Can you tell us why?
Well, I tell you, it was disappointing to see after 10 years of Republicans saying that we can't spend any of the surplus because we needed what they called a rainy day fund. They now, in the year before the re-election campaign for the governor, have decided to spend those dollars on special projects, picking certain communities who have voted a certain way and dousing them with a one-time cash influx for special projects. And it's unfortunate because we have a whole host of things in the state where we're not doing so well. The first and foremost being our teachers lag in pay behind teachers in all the states around us, and we need to do a better job. And so Democrats, I think, argued effectively that those dollars could be spent elsewhere and more effectively, but the Republican majority decided to spend it on these special projects, and so we'll see how that plays out.
Would you have liked to seen the $291 million go to teacher pay?
Public school funding, teacher pay, could have been used to help with water infrastructure, utility infrastructure that's aging. In Northwest Indiana in particular, we have lead concerns that we could have used that money to make sure that for the next 100 years our people, Hoosiers, drink safe water. And instead we used them on special capital projects picked by the governor in the re-election year. It's unfortunate. The
education building projects you're mentioning there, are any of those in your district or in this area, the Evansville area?
There aren't any in this area, and you know, what needs to be remembered about this, these cash projects rather than bonding is comparable to taking out a mortgage on your house. You know, there are certain markets where taking out a mortgage may or may not make sense. Right now, the stock market's going well. You can expect to earn 7, 8, 9, 10, 11% on your money pretty safely. And so taking out a mortgage for 2, 3, 4%, which is the average home mortgage right now, makes more financial sense. And so it doesn't always make sense to pay these cash payments on specialized projects. And let's call it what it is. This is an election year. These are cash projects into certain communities that the governor needs to get reelected.
Now the Republicans say that, that it makes more fiscal sense to use the money for these projects as cash payments. So that is a more fiscal thing, fiscally responsible thing to do. And then address education and teacher pay next session. I'm guessing you don't agree with that.
We've heard for 10 years that they're going to address teacher pay next session. And now we're supposed to wait until after the election for a big teacher pay bill. I think Democrats suggest we should do it now.
All right, well, let's move on to some other education issues. You've authored a few bills regarding education in Indiana. House Bill 1158 reads that beginning this summer, the minimum actual teacher salary cannot be less than $50,000. But as it moves through the process, how do you think it will be received?
We have a minimum teacher pay salary in this state that is the equivalent of the early 2000 time period, and
it's 30-something.
It's about $32,000, and it's time to bring that up to speed with not only the states around us, but to pay the teachers as the professionals that they are, and it sets it at $50,000 a year. And it's aimed at those new teachers, those young teachers, because those are the folks that we're losing. Most teachers who leave the profession are leaving in their first 3 years of service, and so we need to do everything we can to attract and retain good teachers. I don't expect it to get a hearing, let me be forthright. Right. The current education chair, the current Ways and Means chair have indicated they don't intend to hear the bill. That's unfortunate, and we will continue fighting for better teacher pay that not only treats them as the professionals they are, but attracts and retains the best in the Midwest.
Assuming it doesn't get a hearing and doesn't make any progress this session, do you think it will have a better chance next year?
It could have a better chance next year. Look, for the third year in a row since I've been there, every year the Republicans have promised to do teacher pay. Once again, just 2 weeks ago, we heard the governor promise to do it again next year. That's the third year in a row we've heard next year. I'm hopeful next year will be the year and that they'll accept my proposal and raise the minimum teacher pay, along with the entire scale of teachers.
All right, now continuing on the education theme, House Bill 1430 looks to eliminate textbook fees. Why do you think those fees should be eliminated?
This is another bill that I've filed for several years. We have, over the course of the last 10 years, chosen certain sectors of families with school-age kids to help. Most of those families are private school kid families. And so this is a way to help all public school families. That we are one of 5 states that currently charge our public school families for textbooks. Mm-hmm. This eliminates that and helps those families to the tune of several hundreds of dollars a year.
All right, and I should point out that next week we will have a couple of Republican members of the General Assembly here to discuss these issues and more as well. Representative Hatfield, of course, is a Democrat. Let's move on to a driving bill, more specifically a hands-free driving bill. How do you feel about Representative Sullivan's bill, and what exactly does it ban? And I believe now it is headed to the full House, is that right?
It is. It's headed to us this week, and I expect there may be some amendments to it. I'm reserving final judgment on the bill until it hits its final language, because the bill will change in the next couple of days, and I want to make sure that we are tackling the issue that I think we ought to be tackling, which is cell phones are distracting drivers. There's no doubt about it, and the data is great that the number of car crashes, the number of car fatalities are up in the state of Indiana, and the wide range of those are due to handheld devices, mostly cell phones, that are being used while driving. And so we do need to tackle this issue. I think that the bill is headed in the right direction. I expect to support it, but have reserved judgment on it until we see the final language.
Do you have any concerns about the idea?
You know, these bills, I don't have a concern about making sure that we are keeping people safe while driving and trying to reduce the amount of distraction. These bills have a tendency to grow, and sometimes grow into areas that I am uncomfortable with, and want to make sure that the penalties match the particular crimes, and that we're doing the bill in a way that's aimed at the distracted drivers and not just a across-the-board criminal code increase, which sometimes these bills have a tendency to grow into.
All right, well, let's move on to another bill that you're supporting, House Bill 1346. that would look at jail overcrowding. Could you tell us a bit about how it might affect the issues we're seeing here in Vanderburgh County? Obviously, overcrowding has been a problem at the Vanderburgh County Jail for quite a period of time, and they're working to address that issue. Exactly what would this bill do?
This bill is one of a lot of different things that need to happen to reduce jail overcrowding. And Vanderburgh County, you said it, has been dealing with jail overcrowding since we built the new jail. There simply are too many folks in the jail for its current size. It's dangerous for the people who work there, for the jailers, for the sheriff's deputies, and for the inmates. We've got inmates, you know, one of the things I say in communities that have higher percentages of inmates who are concerned about the folks out at the jail, that this is a human crisis as well. We got people sleeping on concrete floors out at the jail. So we need to make sure that our jails are safe, both for the people who work there and for the inmates. That means we have to reduce the population or build bigger jails. I prefer reducing the population. However, in Vanderburgh County, I think that'll mean we have to build a bigger jail, number one, and number two, we have to do things to curb the amount of people who go to jail. This problem was created when the majority party took thousands of inmates that the state was paying for and imprisoning in state facilities that were equipped to handle them through House Bill 1006 and sent them back to the local jails. We currently, it's a funding crisis that we've yet to deal with, and I hope we will, but this is one step of progress.
You talk about reducing the jail population, so do you mean having to let more folks essentially be out on the street, or how would you, where would you draw those lines?
First of all, we want to make sure that anybody who is dangerous to themselves or to others is not only in jail, but receiving treatment, and that we're reducing recidivism rates. But the other thing we need to look at is how many folks are awaiting trial, haven't been convicted of a crime, aren't deemed to be a danger to themselves or others, and are there because they can't afford bail. This is an issue that we've got to tackle. The amount of people sitting in a jail cell who are not a danger to society that can't afford their $50, $100, $500 bail set by a judge. And so that's one of the areas that we need to address going forward.
All right. Let's move on to a bill that's gotten quite a bit of attention at the State House this past week. It essentially addresses a federal measure. Congress recently upped the age for buying tobacco products to 21. There's a bill that's passed the Indiana House and is headed to the Senate that will do essentially the same thing in Indiana. Why is the state pursuing this bill if Congress has essentially already made that change?
I think that we felt in the legislature that we needed to keep up with the federal law and to update our code to ensure that we were in line with where the federal code was. And so that's what that bill did. I supported it for those reasons. I think it was widely supported. And it aligns us with the changes they've made in the federal code.
And speaking of changes, we mentioned tobacco products, but obviously a big concern being addressed here is vaping, correct?
Right.
What exactly would this bill do to address vaping among young folks?
Well, first of all, it raises the age, which the federal government had done, but it keeps us in line with them. And every statistic out there shows us that folks, when you raise the age, the overall curve starts to shift, and older people are primarily those who remain smoking, and that we are able to curb youth smoking and vaping by doing that. And so one of the primary things it does is it raises the age, which hopefully will keep vaping products, tobacco products out of our middle schools and high schools, where we have seen over the last several years a huge increase in smoking.
And I believe the measure also bans a certain vitamin E acetate, I believe, that in vaping products has been blamed for some deaths, as I understand it.
That's right, and we'll continue to study this as an ongoing problem. You know, vaping products are rather new, and the health concerns associated with them are even newer. And so we're going to continue studying that. This bill prohibits one of the chemicals used in vaping products to try to tackle the growing number of youths who are becoming sick, ill, or even dying from vape products.
All right, well, this is a census year in the United States, and there are several bills that address redistricting. Indiana will be redrawing its lines in 2021, next year. Representative Hatfield, do you think there needs to be adjustments in the way Indiana draws the districts? And maybe you could explain a little bit about how the whole redistricting process works.
Sure, yeah. Gerrymandering is the process in which a single party who's in power draws the district lines in which we are elected by, and they do it in such a way that benefits either a Republican or a Democrat. I've been very open about the fact that my district, in order to create multiple Republican districts around me, was drawn for a Democrat. I'm a Democrat, and let's say it what it is. It's easier for a Democrat to win my district than it is for a Republican. But in every district around me, it's easier for a Republican to win than a Democrat. And so the Republican Party in 2010 got to draw those lines. If they keep power in 2020, they'll get to draw them again. We draw them every 10 years.
Right.
And they're able to draw them in such a way that manipulates the data and makes it easier for one party to win over the other. So we need a fair redistricting process in Indiana that develops a nonpartisan or bipartisan group that will draw these lines in a way that is meant to keep communities that are alike together, that is meant to allow for voters to choose their politicians rather than politicians to choose their voters, and ensures that every vote counts and makes sure that the voting process is easy and accessible. So
you'd like to see sort of a bipartisan or a nonpartisan commission overseeing the process?
That's right, and I use both of them because some critics of a nonpartisan process say it's impossible to create a nonpartisan process. I don't know that that's true, but if it is true, let's create a bipartisan process. This problem began literally with a Democratic Republican in the 1800s. And so it has origins in both the Democrat Party and Republican Party. We're both to blame. We've both participated in it. Now let's both get together and fix it.
Now, of course, Republicans have big majorities in both the House and the Senate in Indiana. So barring something major, they will be in power when the redistricting comes around. So do you feel that there's much of a movement, in the direction you'd like to see it go?
I do think that there's a populist movement amongst voters that would like to see a fair process for redistricting. The truth is those in power want to remain in power, and I don't see the shift politically amongst the leadership in the state to do that, at least this time around. All
right. I'll remind our radio listeners that this is Lawmakers on WNIN FM, and we're speaking with Representative Hatfield of Evansville. And this year, 2020, is the 100th anniversary of women winning the right to vote. We have a few shots. In fact, we're going to show a few pictures of you with your daughter from your Twitter feed last week when the Indiana General Assembly celebrated the passage of the 16th Amendment here in Indiana. Can you talk a little bit about the milestone and why you feel it's important?
You know, this is the first year in which my daughter was alive for me to file for office. And it was important to me in this year, 100 years since she received the right to vote, once she turns the age of 18, to file with her and to have her a part of that process. It's a milestone in the state and around the country, and you know, we're at a crossroads now where we need to ensure that accessibility is key, that men and women, no matter their make or where they're from, are able to vote and that their vote counts. But first had to come the right to do so. And 100 years from that date when Olivia and I filed for office, they received that right, and it's a special moment in the state's history.
All right, and we appreciate you letting us share those photos. Let's move on to another bill that's gotten quite a bit of attention, some controversy. Every year there seems to be an attempt to legislate to keep coal plants open in Indiana. This year it's House Bill 1414, which would require coal plants to get state approval before shutting down. Meanwhile, we hear about several area coal mines closing. There's been quite a few job losses in that area. What are your thoughts, Representative Hatfield, about the state regulating whether coal plants can close?
Everybody, all the stakeholders, except for the coal companies, oppose this measure. The utility companies are opposed because there's a process in which we review their business and their IRP process that when they shift from one resource to another, when they shift from coal to natural gas or to renewable energy, that process is working. They say they will be able to continue to provide service, and they're not worried about the ability for them to continue to provide the service. This is a power play by coal companies to prevent the closure of coal mines that are no longer cost effective. The reality is that because of Republican and Democrat administrations, exclusively really, President Bush and President Obama continued to frack at a level that drove natural gas prices down. And so to keep customer rates down, we are shifting our resources from coal to natural gas and then some renewable energies. So in order to keep the coal mines burning, the customer rates are going to have to increase. Well, this bill does just that. It increases rates and keeps the coal mines open. But it does nothing for coal miners who have lost their jobs. We've seen job losses in the hundreds in southern Indiana and thousands in the state over the last several years. You'll see measures from me this session to make sure that we're helping those coal miners who are struggling to keep those jobs, losing those jobs, transitioning out of those jobs for job security. We need to help those folks make sure that they're taken care of.
And what would you do to address some of those job losses?
Well, you're going to see some proposals come from the caucus and from me in the next few weeks, but things like job training, wage protection, making sure that there's a gap, that there is no gap between time when they may lose their job or have lost their job and the amount of time they can get training and then back into the workforce. We need to make sure that there's no period where they're not receiving wages. And so you'll see some proposals come from the Democrat caucus that are aimed at the coal miners rather than the multimillionaire and billionaire owners of coal mines who are really looking out for shareholders and their own profits.
You mentioned renewable energy. Do you see Indiana making any progress in that area, wind, solar, and that kind of thing?
There's no question that we're making progress. There's a huge installation of wind in the northern part of the state. You've seen an expansion of solar over the last several years. And despite really the rollback of renewable programs in the state that would have assisted that even further, you continue to see the expansion. And so renewables are going to play a part in the portfolio going forward. And I believe over time they'll play a larger part. But this coal fight is really a fight between coal and natural gas. And the truth is natural gas is just cheaper and is the resource that will allow our utility companies to keep customer rates where they are.
So natural gas is winning, you might say.
Natural gas is winning due to the fracking out of the federal government off the California coast. Another
House bill headed to the Judiciary Committee would raise the legal age to marry in Indiana from 15 to 17. What are your thoughts on that idea?
Yeah, the child marriage bill, if you will. I'm a co-author of it and am supportive of it. What we found in the data when we were looking at this bill was that folks who get married at 14, 15, 16, there are times in which there's just a Romeo-Juliet romance that makes it, and more power to those folks. But they are few and far between. Most of the situations where 14-year-old is getting married, there's some type of an abuse. It may be to their pimp or to into a bad situation where drugs or sexual abuse seems prevalent. And so this is in line with other states who are moving in this direction to protect our children, keep them away from sex trafficking, and make sure that we're doing everything in the state we can to protect kids. There is an ability for judge and parents to decide that a 14, 15, 16-year-old might have that 1 in a million situation where they've really found somebody that they want to be with and who is good to them and is of like mind and like age, and that both parties are mature enough for that type of relationship. But normally it's an abusive situation, and we want to do everything we can to prevent that.
Right. All right, we have just a couple of minutes left. Any other legislation that you're working on or that you feel we need to keep an eye on this session?
I appreciate you asking. I have 2 bills moving through the House. One passed the full House and is actually headed to the Senate on driving privileges that will ensure the termination of license suspension if a DUI case is found in your favor. And so what was happening in some parts of the state is that when you were arrested and the charge was dismissed by the state or you were acquitted by a jury trial, the bureaucracy, the government, was continuing to suspend your license for a year. We're going to terminate that suspension. That's unjust, and we need to make sure that if the criminal charge has been dismissed or you've been acquitted, that you aren't punished by the government without cause. The other bill that is moving forward that I'm proud to author and is an important bill throughout the state has to do with spills. When a company spills hazardous or dangerous materials into our waterways, we need notification of that. The bill requires notification to IDEM and to the water utility in which the spill may affect to ensure safe drinking water for Hoosiers.
At this point, a spill like that is not reported to those agencies?
There are reporting requirements in the rules, but not in statute, number one. And number two, the notification process doesn't require notification to the water utility, whose job it is to make sure that the water is safe. Right. So this goes a step further to make sure that the water utility knows, hey, we've had a spill, there's possibly dangerous or hazardous materials. Check those levels, make sure that the drinking water we're sending out there is safe for people to drink.
One more quick measure that I'll bring up. It's actually over in the Senate, but it's raised quite a few eyebrows. A bill that would essentially exclude Senate candidates from the primary elections.
It takes away the vote. Yeah, it takes away the votes from Hoosiers to pick their candidates in their party. I disagree with it. I'll oppose it. I think that we have primaries for other offices at the same time. The cost is minimal to make sure that people have a choice in their election and ensure that the candidate that they send on to the Senate general election is the person of their choice. In recent years, we've had people decide to go a different direction. You know, in the Republican Party recently, longtime statesman Dick Lugar lost to Richard Murdoch, and while I know that election wasn't fun for many Republicans, we need to ensure that people have a choice just like they did in that election, so I'll oppose that measure.
All right. Thank you for joining us today, Representative Hatfield. We certainly appreciate you coming in. Next week on Lawmakers, our scheduled guests are Indiana State Senators Vanita Becker and Jim Toms. I'm John Gibson. Thanks for joining us at WNIN Lawmakers.